Hello, everyone. My name is Gene Quinn. Thanks for joining us here today for this webinar. We have a great conversation to be had about 5G. We're going to talk about 6G. We're going to talk about who the patent leaders are on the way to 6G and where we're at with 5G now. And once upon a time when we talked about telecommunications, it was all about cell phones and reaching out and talking to people. Now it's not just us who use these technologies, it's AI, and AI is everywhere, and AI can do an awful lot for us, but it can only do stuff for us if it itself has the connectivity that's necessary in order to deliver on the promise. So we got a lot of ground to cover here today. So I'm going to just kick it over to Renee right away to introduce our speakers. Renee.
Thanks, Gene. Today on our panel, we have Dr. Shahrokh Nayeb Nazar. He is the Vice President of Technology and Head of Patent Assertion and Portfolio Analysis at Qualcomm Technology Licensing. He leads Qualcomm's global patent assertion and enforcement strategy and plays a key role in technical analysis and licensing negotiations worldwide. With more than 25 years in wireless communications, he has been a major contributor to 3GPP standards, holds over 300 patent applications, and earned his PhD in electrical engineering from McGill University. Pardon me. Next, we have Lew Zaretzki. He's the founder and managing director of Hamilton IPV, where he advises leading technology companies and investors on IP strategy, licensing, valuation, and M&A, particularly in cellular and other SEP-heavy industries. He's widely published on smartphone patent royalties, leads the LOT Network's 5G Transparency Project, and has been named to the IAM Strategy 300 every year since 2009. Lew holds an MBA from Duke and a BA from the University of Michigan. Next, we have Dr. Tim Pullman. He is the Managing Director, Americas at LexisNexis IP Solutions, and the founder of IPlytics, which was acquired by LexisNexis in 2022. A leading expert on patents and standards, his academic work focused on patenting and coordination in standardization. Tim earned his doctorate with highest distinction from Berlin Institute of Technology and is widely recognized for his data-driven insights into SEP landscapes. And last but not least, we have our moderator, Gene Quinn. He's a patent attorney and one of the most influential voices in intellectual property. He founded IPWatchdog in 1999, which has become a trusted resource on patent law, innovation, policy, and technology. He is especially known for his expertise in software patentability and U.S. patent practice, and is consistently recognized as a top IP strategist in the world. So you're in great hands with this panel. Back to you, Gene.
Great. Thanks a lot, Renee. And once again, thank you all for joining us here today. We have a lot of ground to cover, and I always enjoy having Tim on as a panelist, and he's going to moderate. I'll really kind of maybe co-moderate with him. I will keep my eye on the Q&A box. If you have questions for the panel, please put it in the Q&A box. If you want to chat amongst yourselves, have at it in the chat box. Sometimes the chat gets a little bit crazy. So if we want something to go to the panelists, please put it in the Q&A box. But one of the reasons I love having you on, Tim, is you always come with a great presentation full of information. You're a data guy. So maybe the thing to do is just to turn it right over to you from the start and see if you could just maybe lay the foundation, the predicate for what we're going to have a conversation about here today.
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me, Gene, Renee. It's always a pleasure. These sessions are always exciting and fun. And yes, I'm excusing myself. I want to show some data. That's me. And I'll make it brief, though, because I want to also hear from our great experts today. But we have just Monday last week published our latest version of the 5G report. And I just wanted to give you an update on what's in there, what you can expect. I'm not going to show you everything because I want you to download it and read it, but I give you some highlights, right? What we can see, and I think that is something that people keep asking me, right? 5G was developed in 2015. I'm sure that landscape is not evolving. But in fact, if you look at the declarations to 5G, it is evolving. It is increasing year over year, more and more, right? 6,000 more every year, 8,000. And then again, from last year, we see almost 15,000 more declared patent families that are active and granted, right? So the total landscape is increasing, and it's year over year. And that, of course, may sometimes change shifts of ranks and positions of companies that declare those patents. Also, what is always evolving are the number of technical contributions that are submitted at the 3GPP meetings. Here, our data is from October 31st. So as of now, we have higher numbers here for the 2025 numbers. But if you look at the years, it's been year over year, 80, 90,000 of those contributions. We already filter only the technical ones. So we basically filter out all those edits and editorial or agenda items. So it's a lot of technical work that goes into that standard, right? So these patents don't fall from heaven. You can always debate which of those are essential, but there's a lot of technical work still going on, right? Who is leading? And again, we are at Lexis. We don't want to make a decision who is number 1, 2, or 3, right? We are a data provider, and we want to provide different approaches of how to rank those companies if you want to rank them, right? This year, and it doesn't mean that this is our opinion on the best practice, we decided 3 columns. The first one is the column of declared patents active and granted anywhere in the world with at least 1 patent in that family active and granted, just counting patent families. The second one uses the patent asset index. It's a value metric indicator that basically shows, how relevant those patent families are in the industry. And the third one is counting those technical contributions, right? So these are contributions with technical, merit in there. Again, we don't want to say that one contribution is to be compared with one patent, but is another way to look at who is leading in 5G, because the development of a standard, allows you to steer the standard and also steer the standard for the next generation in 6G when you have your experts at these meetings. And as you can see, the top 10 is, of course, a stable group of companies that year over year are in that top 10 rankings because they are doing the most of that work, right, for the generations of standards. Now, another thing that we raise again in the report, and I make this brief, but it's important, is that this data is publicly available, but very difficult to handle. Etsy provides this publicly, and I think Etsy does a great job to make all those companies declare. But the main challenge is that every company is declaring in a different way, and that makes this data very difficult to use, very complex. We have different formats of how these patents are declared, matching those numbers. We don't know from the beginning, is this an application number, publication number, priority number? Of course, we have intelligence systems to detect that, but there's so many ways that can go wrong. Even worse is when you have patents in there that shouldn't be in there, right? We have a Hall of Fame of funny patents in the Etsy declaration database. One is a necklace patent. One is, I think, a refrigerator patent. And because those companies who own these patents may be still legit owners, like Samsung's washing machine patent. Samsung is a big holder of 5G patents too, right? But, we filter all those out, all those patents that have nothing to do with cellular. And last but not least, even most important, I believe, is enriching that data, knowing exactly who owns what in all these different jurisdictions. We go through all these offices and understand in China, in Korea, in Japan, US, Europe, everywhere in the world, who is the latest owner of that family and who is the owner of that company. So we have corporate data in there. We also have a very sophisticated way to identify what's 5G, what's 4G. You have to make a distinction there. We have an understanding of different releases, different working groups. You have to always associate that data with actual technical information from standards. What very important is that we have a very high rate of accuracy. Why is that important? Because we're not claiming that this data in any ways reflects the true number of essential patents. We all know these are declared, self-declared, and they may not be essential. But what we see in the market is, especially in litigation, lots of companies use that data and then subsequently use the data on use other things on top. But they take that as a foundation, right? Some do claim charting on top, or they use samples of claim charts, or they have their own way of evaluating patents. And if the foundation isn't 100% accurate, any subsequent analysis is off, is even biased, I would argue. And I'll show you some of these biases, because if every patent or every company would declare in a similar way, and we have a little bit of an error rate, that wouldn't be an issue. But the companies declare so differently that the results are heavily biased. This is a ranking of numbers that you wouldn't match if you don't do a very sophisticated matching. And you see that Ericsson has almost 3,000 families in there because they mostly declare priority numbers, which is totally fine, right? It's the way they do it. But finding priority numbers is so much harder than finding 10 counterparts of a family the way that other companies do it, because one will hit and then you have the family and then you can count it in. Ericsson only declares that one patent with a priority number. So we made the hard job. We found all these patents. But if you don't, Ericsson's portfolio is systematically lower than it should be, right? And there's other companies in there that you see, Huawei, Qualcomm, also Nokia, that have a lot of these patents that are very difficult to find. And if you don't find them, you will systematically, have lower numbers for these companies. Also very bad is that Etsy provides you a basis patent and they're trying to add counterparts, but they're not really doing a good job. They're actually missing family counterparts, even if you use the Etsy family definition. You see that for the US, for example, over 9,000 counterparts are missing. So again, if you would look at portfolios, let's say only for the US, and some companies who have first filings in China and Etsy doesn't do a good job to find counterparts in the US, they wouldn't be, represented accurately. And again, we would have a bias, then non-US companies may be not represented as they should be, even though they have declared these counterparts. So again, we have to do a lot of work to find those, right? And again, this is very, very important because declaration behavior is different from company to company. And if you have very perfect data, one company is overrated over another just because they have a different practice of declaring. And to make it very bulletproof, we went to all these companies, 35 now, last year was 30, and we talked to the data people in these companies, those who make the declarations, those who flag if a patent within a portfolio has been declared to Etsy, and we compared it with our data, making sure that 99% of our database is reflected into those companies' database. And if it isn't reflected, we suggest redeclare your patent to Etsy because we can't find it in Etsy, you can find it in Etsy, redeclare it. Or they explain to us how we find the patent number in the worldwide jurisdiction so we can add it to our data, right? Either way, we can make sure, and we do that on a continuous basis, that we reflect what is declared. Again, not verifying if it's essential or not, but verifying it's in our database. And if you would imagine, and again, I'm not making this up, this happens as we speak, there's a very big litigation going on right now across different jurisdictions, and they decided to look at IPlytics data. But if you would use Etsy raw data and only, let's say, the portfolio, you get the portfolio wrong by, let's say, 1%. If you really base a top-down analysis on this, it could be like in the millions of royalty revenue that you're off, that your analysis is just wrong, just because you didn't do a good job with the foundational data. Again, whether or not you should use it for top-down, we don't have an opinion on it in LexisNexis. We're just suggesting if you should use the data, use the right data, use the clean data, and use the verified data. And that is also what it's showing. There's this company called Lex Machina. It's a software that is our sister company, and it allows you to search within the dockets. And we found IPlytics data cited across so many different cases, federal district court, courts of appeals, ITC. It's heavily cited. It's used by economic experts in their testimony. It upheld Daubert a couple of times in those cases, and it's really cited across judges, the Department of Justice and others. And the very last point here, and that's, I think, most important to me, it's equally put forward by the patent holders and the implementers, or by their legal representatives or economic experts. And that's, to me, very important because, our industry in the SEP licensing world has camps, right? And we don't want to build anything for one camp or the other. We don't have an agenda. We want to be the neutral source that both sides can agree on to use. So that was it in a nutshell, what you can expect from the new report. A lot more data, of course, a lot more statistics in that report version.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tim. And before I turn it over to you and the panelists to have a conversation about what all this means for the industry, I do have a couple questions. It struck me as odd that these companies, maybe Ericsson or maybe not just Ericsson, but that they don't seem to. I don't even know what the right word is, because maybe take a step back before. You're not trying to solve for what is and what is not essential, correct? This is not an essentiality test you're doing.
Exactly, right? I mean, and we all know if I would go to those 35 companies and ask them to confirm patent by patent whether or not it's essential, they wouldn't do that, right? Or they would do it, but can I trust that, right? So it's not about this. I'm really just asking anything that you have internally flagged as declared, not essential, just declared, that you believe should be in Etsy. Is that really in Etsy, or is it in our database? And we want to make sure it it matches, 100%. And some we have at 100%. There's just sometimes those few cases where that one small Vietnamese patent is missing for whatever reason. So we cannot say 100%. So we have to say 99.9. But that's
Yeah,
the
well,
way
I mean, 100%, whether it be you or be them, I mean, that's, the goal. Obviously, it's not attainable, but it seems like some of these companies, I mean, what's the thought process? Like, is it just that they're so busy doing what they're doing that they don't stop, and then you show up and you ask these questions and they're like, oh yeah, maybe we should be putting that over there, or is it
I
a
mean,
different accounting? What's going on?
I mean, to be honest, every company does it differently, right? We've been to that one company who said, we have now the 15th intern who manages our declaration data, right? So some have interns on it, some take it very serious, and the leader of the IP group has to do it, right? There's so many different ways of approaching that declaration database that, and some do it every month, some do it every quarter, some once per year, right? There's a big bunch of China mobile patents that were just declared before the report. I mean, we captured those in the report, but from one day to another, we had 1,500 families from China mobile coming in because they gathered them and they declared them all in one, bunch, which most companies these days don't do because you have the obligation to declare as early as you can to, have full enforcement rights and, no delay in this. But I think that's the big issue, right? If there is a little bit of an error rate, we wouldn't care maybe in data, that's fine. But it's so different of how they approach it that if you don't clean out that error, certain companies will be underrated, undercounted for, right?
Right. I mean, error in data is to be expected, but when you aren't trying to get it 100%, then the error just starts to compound and compound. It seems to me. I would put not just an intern on this, and certainly not somebody who's rolling over. I mean, because whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, these things do get used from the top down. How many do you have? And that is at least a starting point. And maybe that's a question. Is that how this Etsy declaration data is used in practice? And maybe the follow-up is, to what extent is it relevant for the FRAND negotiations or FRAND dancing?
Yes, I mean, we can all agree, and we will hear later also from Lew and Shahrokh on it. There's a lot of things that go into these very complex negotiations, and a declaration view of top down is by far not the only thing, but it's used more and more as one data point, right? And then work is done on top of it. The data may be more refined, or they look into certain jurisdictions only, or again, they do claim charting after and say, this is the count, but the essentiality rate for different companies is applied differently. So I believe, the shares change, but they always start at what is publicly available, what we can all agree up is in the public domain, and it's not perfect, but it's often that starting point. And again, we just want to make sure if you use the data, we're not saying you have to for every FRAND negotiation, FRAND determination, but if you do it, you should at least use the data in the right way. And I think many companies nowadays agree, okay, let's look at IP analytics as one way, not to determine everything, but let's have a starting point, look at it, see where we are. And then we come up with reasons why one of the other is bigger or not bigger, but it's one point among many others, but it's one point, right?
I agree. I mean, I makes all the sense in the world to me. I mean, if we're going to have this conversation, we kind of need to get our hands around what the universe is to start with. And if you can't even agree on what universe you're in, if I'm in one universe, you're in a parallel, we're never going to cross. So getting your hands around what is actually factually represented in the market seems like a good move to me. So now I will kick it back over to you, and so we can bring in our experts and get their analysis. And if you do have any questions from the audience, please put them in the Q&A box. And but Tim, take it away.
Yeah. I mean, I have basically kind of structured my questions in different buckets. So I want to start with understanding from our experts better. Every year things change, right? The SEP licensing world, the FRAND determination world, litigation. Year after year, we have new decisions and new trends. So I would love to hear and the observation from our experts, and maybe I'll start with you, Lew. What do you see? What kind of trends do you see from the past year or past several years that have been evolving and that you find interesting?
Yeah, well, I'd say we're now living in a new golden age for SEP licensing, and you can pull out a lot of trends inside of that that all sort of reinforce each other. You could debate what's the causality, but we have more standards subject to licensing. So Wi-Fi has become very popular. It's been popular as a product for a long time, but not really a nexus for a lot of SEP licensing. We have more relevant product markets with the convergence of these standards into other products in IoT and automotive and all these other fields. We have more and better licensing support services, whether it's the licensing platforms or pools, litigation financing, and so forth, that increase the propensity and quality of efforts in those fields. More jurisdictions have become either useful, relevant, or at least experimental around the world, and arguably a more favorable legal, judicial, policy environment across many jurisdictions. And so, with all of these five at least things, it's putting us into this new golden age of SEP licensing, in my opinion.
Very interesting. What are your thoughts, Shahrokh, on this? What are the biggest challenges in negotiating a SEP license today? And are there differences also across jurisdictions and regions or company by company, how they approach this topic? How do you see the trends there?
Sure. First, thank you for having me on this panel. And before I start, as usual, I have to just make a disclaimer that the comments reflect my own views at this moment and don't represent Qualcomm's official position. But to answer your question, when we talk about SEP licensing, obviously, it's a really broad umbrella. But since this session is building on this LexisNexis 5G report that you just presented, let me just focus specifically on 5G SEP licensing. And at the end of the day, right now, handsets still make up the bulk of 5G SEP licensing. And that hasn't changed. We are definitely seeing automotive moving into 5G. And beyond that, the next real momentum is in access point and fixed wireless access. So this is really the universe of 5G SEP licensing at the moment. And of course, SEP licensing only matters to the extent that these products are actually commercialized, right? So naturally, the handset space continues to dominate. And if I wanted to focus on the handset side, things are pretty stable, both the market and licensing environment. The market has been very concentrated for years now. There are fewer than 10 OEMs consistently representing about 80% of global shipments since 2019, and that's not likely to shift dramatically in the coming years. And it's not just Qualcomm saying licensing is in a good place. If you follow Ericsson, Nokia, and InterDigital, they publicly are now reporting high compliance, around 80 to 90% of the market operating under license. Of course, Qualcomm was the first one that reached that level of coverage, but now you're saying that most major licensors have caught up. And in the handset space, I don't really see major challenge. It's pretty mature, well understood, and functioning as expected. When we shift over to automotive, 5G licensing is definitely relevant and becoming more routine. A lot of major patent holders now run direct licensing programs with automakers, including Qualcomm. And interestingly, even companies like Oppo have recently started signing their own direct deals with car manufacturers. And we all know also that Avanci is doing quite well in both 4G and 5G automotive programs. That being said, there's still work ahead, especially in getting more Chinese automakers into the fold. The market there is incredibly competitive in China, and many of those companies are still pretty new to the whole cellular licensing world. So overall, I would say 5G auto licensing is a pretty stable, similar to the handset. But with respect to the second question, when you look at basically the licensing agreements, they are all global in nature. So in practice, there are major regional differences in licensing approaches, but there could be differences in licensing approaches among companies. Going back again to your earlier question. Each company may have a different licensing model. For example, Qualcomm uses a running royalty structure rather than a lump sum payment, which is a per unit net selling price based royalty, which is generally more transparent, and we believe it's easier to interpret, especially in consolidated markets like handset. There are many other licensors that rely on lump sum deals, which can make the renewals and unpacking pretty challenging. And then you will see that sometimes it leads to disagreements. And also cross-licensing dynamics also matter. If a company like Qualcomm is both a licensor and an implementer, right, the negotiation naturally shift toward the cross-licensing rather than a one-way license. But there are companies like, for example, Interdigital, which does not manufacture devices that may not approach licensing the same way.
Very good. Thank you so much, Shahrokh. And maybe one follow-up, because I saw it in the chat. I think that you're the best one to answer. Since 5G is set, why do we still see so many patents, right?
Well, this is a very good question, and we have to look at it from maybe a big picture. It has been always a continuous innovations, and a lot of technologies that are currently being developed, let's say as part of 5G Advanced, you can look at them as a precursor to 6G. Whether they are working on AI, or they're looking at integrated sensing and communication, you will see, NTN. So all of them are kind of the way that I look at them is just continuation of innovation and building the baseline for future 6G.
Very good. I would like
Tim,
to
there's
also
just the reality that these patents, the more sophisticated they are, they take a long time to get these. These are not so that you plant the flag, you define everything, and so it's not like the patent office is just handing out patents on things that are old or obvious, like so many people believe. That's not the experience.
Yeah, and I think we are already on the road to 6G. We will discuss that later, but I guess some of the foundational work there is also starting, right? So what we capture in our data is maybe, it's 5G Advanced, and maybe even some patents that will be, or many patents will be relevant for 6G as well, I'm sure. I think it could be a good time, Gene, for also asking our audience what they see as a trend and challenge moving forward.
Yep. Just posted it. Do you guys see that?
Yep.
So not to influence the audience's answer to this, but do you guys have a favorite answer that you like here? Or if you had to guess maybe what they were going to say, what would you either pick yourself, or what do you think others are going to pick?
I would say beyond the smartphones, I think what has been really a game changer was really, the creativity and licensing of pools, aggregators, and all these different ways of licensing that are out there now. So I felt that has at least changed dynamics it's my way.
Mm-hmm. So this is going to come down to the wire right now. We have a three-way lead. So we could probably we're approaching about half the audience having answered this, and maybe the interesting thing is which one do you think will be way behind? So let me end the poll here, and I can show you, because we have essentially functionally a tie here and then one of them, the stricter implementation of FRAND in transparency. That one was not, people didn't see, but the other three, almost equal numbers there. Does that surprise you at all?
I guess it's always a mix, right? It's always a mix of things happening around the world. Different. What I think is interesting, that the global FRAND determination, right? China, UK, and then maybe UPC. That's interesting, but of course, it's always driven by these big players who negotiate and make deals. And then, as I said, in other areas outside of smartphones, I think it's really tools and other ways have picked up, right? So it's probably those trends, I would argue, make those numbers. But
and I wonder too, with something like, and specifically in this space, it's so dynamic, right? That if we ask the same group of people the same exact question next week, they might pick something different because, you know, next week they're looking at it from a slightly different lens than they are this week. Or, you know, next week we may have a big court decision that kind of makes everybody look at things a little differently. Or you may have a big announcement for a licensing deal. And, you know, then that becomes, it's a very dynamic practice area.
It wasn't an option, but if there had been a choice of, you know, more engagements, more deals, more royalties, I would have picked that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. All right. So we got another couple poll questions we'll get to, so stay tuned for those. But back to you, Tim.
Yeah. Over to the next topic. I want to go back to the data topic and address my first question to you, Lew, because I know you're a data person as well. We share that, and you've done a lot of analysis on, you know, on top of these reports. So my question to you would be, what role do you think data plays in these FRAND determination negotiations or litigation? And how do you see that this data is actually used and relied upon in these discussions?
Well, I mean, if you go back in time, we had originally, you know, one study of a landscape, and you know, the Goodman and Myers, and then there was the rebuttal to that, so another one. But if we go forward in time to something like the Nokia Oppo dispute in China, we see maybe a dozen landscapes being introduced in that case, trying to get at every different aspect of understanding what's going on with the positions of the different companies. And I think that makes sense. You know, if I were the court, I'd want to get access to as many perspectives as possible that could maybe help me if one could be a little bit better in some regard. And so what we do is we do this meta-analysis of 5G landscapes. We try to get every commercially available 5G landscape and compare them all. And we know that they're not all equal in quality, although it may be difficult to assess, you know, which ones are of higher quality. You know, I'll make an exception for your verified program. You know, that just seems like an obvious best practice that everybody should do. But anyway, so we compare these all, and we know that some parties may be using one study or two studies, and some might look at more. But we think that by looking at all the studies together, you can get a view of what we call the theory of mind in psychology. We can put ourselves in the shoes of all the parties in the industry and consider how they see the world. So just for example, you know, this is a box and whisker plot of all the studies in recent period for a few companies. And you can see that there's a huge range of outcomes. And so, for example, somebody has LG as low as 3, and someone else has them as high as 17. And so you might guess that if you were meeting with LG, they would probably know about the 17 because they would have wanted to find the one that presents them in the best light. And they probably would imagine that if they were to meet a counterparty in negotiations, that counterparty might have the 3% study because that would seem to be in their self-interest if they could find it. So, you know, a theory of mind says we can put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and understand something about what they're thinking and where they're coming from. And, you know, you could think of it as situational awareness that you get from seeing all of these studies plotted together. Now, that doesn't really tell you anything about what's true, but you can see what's most supported, right? So, for example, if the median of 16 studies is, say, 7% for LG, you know, that's supported by a great many studies, not just by a single study. So, you know, as in the Oppo case, I think we expect people to work harder, look at more studies, trying to support their position or understand what their position should be. Courts might be interested in getting more perspectives if it'll help them understand, you know, what's really the case or how to look at it.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, Lew. Thank you for sharing. There's also a paper that Lew and I wrote about, and this is Lew's part, of course, on these particular meta study. But I think it's interesting to look at these numbers, understanding we are part of those plot numbers. But I think it's an interesting thing to see all these different reports coming out at different ways, but as a data person, rule of large numbers, looking at these median values is something interesting to consider. To you, Shahrokh, I know you approached this whole data and providing evidence to counterparties a bit differently, maybe, or Qualcomm put differently, has a best practice here. You're one of the main licensors. I would love to understand a little bit more of how you approach this in your technical discussions, but also maybe later in economic discussions on how you present your portfolio to licensees or to the implementers that you want to, negotiate with or close a deal with.
Sure. So I personally wouldn't deny that this 5G patent data always comes up in the actual negotiation. And people obviously point to the third-party reports, rankings, or the declaration cons from ETSI if it helps with to make their case. But in real-world negotiation, when you're dealing with major licensors and licensees, you remember we talked about 9 or 10 of them. These are pretty sophisticated teams, and those numbers generally don't drive the actual licensing terms. And the heavy lifting is always done in the technical discussion phase that we spend months to evaluate each other's portfolio. And that's where we exchange representative claim chart, and then we evaluate the substance of the portfolio. But per my experience, again, the ETSI declaration data plays a role as a starting point, mainly to estimate how many claim charts we will need to exchange, right? If a company has a small portfolio, we typically wouldn't expect them to send us like more than 10 or 20 claim charts. But when it's a major player with thousands of declared patents, it's completely normal to exchange several hundred claim charts so we can properly assess the technical merits of each other's portfolio. And once we have these claim charts during the technical evaluation, we always end up asking the same core questions. Does the claim invention actually read on this standard? Obviously, for a claim to be essential, every claim element must map to this standard. Is the patent legally strong and enforceable? Team better than me, the 3GPP space is very crowded. And every generation of cellular standard builds on the foundations of the previous one. So it's crucial to verify if a claim is valid. Then the other question is the technology actually implemented in commercial product. One thing that often gets overlooked is that most of the features added after release 16 are actually optional. And a lot of them never end up getting deployed. So when you look at patents covering those kind of features, you really have to dig in a bit more to assess their practical value. And if a feature isn't currently implemented, you may also consider the likelihood of the adoption in the future. The other question that we ask is whether the technology is really relevant to the product or use case being licensed. Again, as 5G evolved, especially starting with release 16, we saw almost half of the 3GPP's work shift toward all kinds of new verticals like automotive, unlicensed spectrum, industrial IoT, XR, satellite, RedCap, and the list goes on and on. And the thing is, a lot of the patents tied to those areas may not be relevant to the handset licensing, for example, right? And the other question, again, which is very important in my view, is that whether the patent covers a critical or foundational part of the standard. You heard it from Qualcomm a lot that patents that cover the foundational part of the system, things like channel coding, waveform, and modulation, are far more valuable than incremental add-on features. And these core technologies are valuable because they're used everywhere, right? These are mandatory features across every device, every network, and their impact is huge. So that's why leaning on the ETSI data just doesn't tell you what you need to know in a real negotiation to evaluate a portfolio. I would love one day, team, you tell me that, okay, we came up with this data that is going to provide you, I don't know, the use cases or the deployment of every single patent. I think these are very, very important aspects that currently is missing, obviously, from most of the databases.
Yeah. No, I fully understand that. And of course, we're working hard on this. As you know, maybe also, Shahrokh, we are breaking down the 5G patents into IoT protocols, for example, NB-IoT, LTE-M, and Cat1. We're also working on dividing them by device, user equipment, and network, right? But it's, of course, not where it is anywhere perfect because we know the complexity, of how these claims are written. Some are more straightforward, but there are some that even several experts have different opinions on. courts have decided on the same patent differently in different courts. It is complex. It's not straightforward. And maybe to address one of those questions here that came through the chat, how do you see AI bringing transparency to the question? I think AI will definitely help to bring some transparency, but at the same time, we have to be very careful that we don't press a button and let an AI say yes and no. I think it can help subject matter experts that know how to claim truth, like you, Shahrokh, maybe to do that faster, or your team of experts to do that faster, and to do some of the work. And we at LexisNexis also support that. But I think we're not there yet where an AI would tell you from thousands and hundred thousands of patents which are essential, and then even more, as you say, which are relevant for which exact use case, and therefore infringing that particular use case. I think we are, a few years from that, and it will probably always need that subject matter expert, that human, to also look at it and verify it, right? But I think it's technology can help, and we are at the forefront of making that helpful. Another question I wanted to address here is about why do we think SSOs are not efficiently doing this? I think SSOs are not the ones who have to do it. I think Etsy does an amazing job already, even though they don't, it's not their job to create a perfect database. It's a job to allow their members to fulfill the declaration obligation. And then companies like us, who are data experts, who have also, by the way, several people working on this and paying salaries for those people to make the data great, I think that's our business. And I know the Etsy people who maintain the data, and they're great people, but they're like 2-3 people, right? They cannot do that work of what we do with our hundreds of people and years of experience in data quality, right? I think that's a big difference of where we are. And I think also that's another question. WIPO does a great job. They're also, they're taking all that public data into one place in PatScope. And again, people keep asking me, is that a competition to you guys? And I was like, no. They're making that public data and they aggregate it in one place, which is nice, which is great, but it's not going to help with any of this because the data remains in that same shape or form as it is at Etsy. Or if you add data from a patent pool, that patent pool is only covering 20% of the patents. You need to know the whole landscape and how much coverage that patent pool has. So that data is not going to help you with those questions, but it's good, I think, that it's, everyone tries to put it in one place and everyone tries to make it better accessible, whatever is there. And then let the data experts create tools like ours and others out there that help with more sophisticated questions. That would be my take on it. But
so Tim, can I ask you a quick question? I mean, because it seems like with the data, data can often say whatever it is that you want it to say. You can manipulate data to say all kinds of different things. And it seems like maybe you could just speak to just how difficult this is. Because as Shahrokh was talking, the thing that came to mind is, like Qualcomm, I think would love to have this conversation about like the core patents because their technology is great. I mean, it's wonderful. They're not playing. They have a lot of patents. They don't play the game. We're a global thermonuclear war where we're just trying to get patents and get more and more patents. Yeah. So, but it's how do you solve for? You have the people on the licensing side that want the patents, lower numbers, weed these out. These aren't the one, whatever. Then you have all on the other side. You have two categories of folks. What I would call true innovators like Qualcomm and others that really do the core stuff. And then you get some that are just trying to, me too, and jack up the numbers so they have a high number portfolio. And it seems like you got at least 3 different ways to look at this data. How do you as a data guy solve for that?
I mean, again, we are providing data so that people can have access to the best quality data to refine and analyze the data further. But I give you an example. Look at Qualcomm, right? Qualcomm has the second most 5G declared patents, but is number 1 when you apply the value metric, right?
And that's year after year, pretty much, right?
That's year after year. And other companies like InterDigital, they're like 17th, just counting patent families, but they're number 7 when you have the value metric, right? Companies that clearly double down on having core technology in those fields. Look at declarations to release 15 compared to subsequent releases. Qualcomm dominates 15. Companies like LG, who is 5th, number 5, if you count all declarations, they don't have many release 15. They have other later releases patents declared, or round one, round two, physical layer groups. We can look at who declared to those compared to others. There is some ways, and it's not perfect, in the data that show you very clearly that an LG has declared a lot of patents, but these are in subsequent releases in other groups. They hardly have very little contributions to, the total number of 5G declarations is kind of like very high, right? Compared to those other numbers where you can kind of slice the data into different directions. And I'm not saying they don't have high quality patents, but you can see patterns, and those patterns allow you to make assumptions. And again, I'm not saying it's perfect yet, but a lot of those assumptions, and I know our customers and I know the big players in the market, I think all of what we see makes sense. It's not going to be perfect, but it makes sense. I see patterns that resonate with stories of Qualcomm, of InterDigital, and of others that clearly, get most revenue in from SEPs that are very successfully in their licensing programs and that have patents with high quality that have been surviving lots of litigation and licensing negotiations. So I think if as long as that correlates and matches, I'm happy with our data, at the level as it is, if that makes sense.
No, I think it does. And it certainly seems like it's valuable to me. I mean, I know a lot of people use it, and it tells a story. And then it's our job to make sure that story matches reality, which I think usually, in my experience, it does.
I think we have one poll question on that also on data. So maybe we take that, look at what the audience think.
Sure. So the question is, how do you see the use of 5G data evolving in courts and SEP negotiations over the next year? It'd be interesting to get Lew and Shahrokh what your thoughts on this here too. So the responses are starting to roll in. I can tell when people are seriously contemplating their answer because they start to trickle in, and then all of a sudden they start to come in hot and heavy. There is going to be, it looks like, a clear winner here out of these three. Let it stay open for another few seconds here. We're approaching 50% of those here who have answered that. So if we can get to 50%, that we just crossed over 50%. We could probably close it out now and see. And let me share the results here. So the top answer is more than double, or not quite more than double both in the next two, but increasingly relied upon to support royalty calculations. And then a distant second, mainly used for defensively in litigation. Is that what you guys would have expected?
I guess I would have. I mean, the key word, if you're forecasting, would be increasingly, and so that begs the question of how was it treated in the past? And I would say it was used extensively in the past and will continue to be used extensively. So I don't know if there's an increase. It's already widely used.
Mm-hmm.
And on my side, so again, it's not an option here, but what at least we have seen in the past few years is still courts are really relying on the comparable license first to determine the rates. And then the 5G patent data in some cases comes second as a cross-check for top-down approach.
And again, I think that wasn't even a question, just to be clear. I think also comparable licenses are probably the best way to look at it. I've seen also, however, whether or not a license is comparable, also our data has been used for that, right? I'm not saying it's the best approach, but I think it's the data question can be across different approaches of how you actually come to conclusions. I'm surprised that the last question was the lowest, because we see increasingly that, ETSI does a great job, right? Most of the patents in the world are declared there, but for Wi-Fi video audio, we have very little data, right? And, we have a lot of customers now that want that data because there's nothing in the public domain to get an understanding, right? Of who owns what. And again, it's not perfect, but at least, these are the major players. This is probably the coverage of the pool, even though we may have error rates and ranges, right? We could do loose loose meta-analysis on pool coverage for, let's say, tree or for HEVC, right? And we probably get to a mean number or medium number that gives us a good idea of what a pool is covering. And that will be valuable, right? Because of implementers, if a pool approaches them, they want to know, am I covered or not, right? So I think, but again, it's interesting. I think that question was one that I was personally very much interested in. I'm happy that people increasingly keep using it, right? It was maybe a leading question. I know that you, Shahrokh, wanted to discuss 6G also. And if I look that we only have 9 minutes left, can I combine two questions to you? One, and we discussed that before, I think it's interesting to see a little bit of a shift of investments. We discussed NVIDIA investing in Nokia, AI, RAN, and all of those new things that are up and coming. And suddenly people from NVIDIA showing up at 3GPP meetings. And the road ahead to 6G, which I think is also connected to that, would be my question to you. What is going to change for 6G, even though we don't know what the standard will look like? But what do you think will change? Will we see a shift? Will we see new players in the market? And what are the focus topics of 6G compared to 5G? Many questions, but I wanted to address that because I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, because you're a true technical expert and you go to those meetings and you see a lot.
I no longer go to those meetings anymore, but I'm following it very closely. But let me try to maybe provide a little bit of context of what we are seeing, because 6G standardization process has already started, around the mid 2025. And what we are seeing right now is that just similar to what happened in 5G, that it really didn't replace 4G, it evolved from it. You remember we kept the same OFDM family waveform. We expanded the carrier aggregation from LTE Advanced, and we took 4G MIMO. We scaled it to massive MIMO. It was always a continuity. And we're seeing the exact same thing now going into 6G, which is very interesting. So if you look at the latest RAN 1 agreement, which is the most important working group in 3GPP, now 6G is continuing to use the same channel coding families like polar code and LDPC that 5G introduced. It's keeping the same modulation schemes, and it's building in the same OFDM-based waveform that 5G made more flexible with the scalable numerology. So one observation is that 6G isn't replacing these fundamentals, right? And it's enhancing and scaling the tools that 5G already proved. So that's number one. And that being said, we are also seeing that because of these AI-enabled use cases, we also need significant enhancements, particularly in uplink capacity and coverage, and applications that you're seeing getting a lot of tractions, like smart glasses at the commercial scale. And these devices, sooner than later, they are going to continuously capture, process, and transmit high-resolution videos, for example, for live streaming, things like that, that they're going to overload the existing network in ways that obviously it's far beyond today's XR workloads. So we believe that there is still substantial headroom for optimizations compared to 5G. And there's a lot of opportunities for a spectral efficiency in existing band, or increasing the uplink capacity in the new bands, and advances in MIMO, AI native air interface, and all these different technologies that everybody's talking about. So the first lesson, in short, is that 6G isn't a clean break from 5G, and it's a natural next step. The second thing that we are seeing is that there are a few very interesting and exciting emerging technologies that are reshaping the foundation of the future standards. You may have heard about the integrated AI and communication. Sometimes they call it AI native networks, or they call it AI assisted air interface, whatever they call it. It means that there is no doubt that AI is going to be absolutely central to 6G. And we are really moving forward an AI, or maybe moving toward an AI native system where you have this intelligence is built into the network and devices from day one. And that means that you have a smarter, more adaptive networks, continuous optimization, and far better user experiences with AI deeply integrated. And 6G is going to unlock a lot of advanced applications at scale. I just called out like the XR application as one of them. But there are many other AI enabled applications that we don't know about them, and they may come up in the next 5-10 years. So now it's also worth noting, I think we already mentioned it, that AI is already being used in 5G Advanced, for example, for beam management, channel state information, feedback and compression, positioning, which are paving the way for true AI native air interface in 6G. The other very interesting topic is integrated sensing and communication. Here, sensing is going to be a major part of what makes 6G fundamentally different. You're going to see that wireless networks is not going to just to be used for communication. They are going to perceive the world around them, right? So there are very interesting and exciting things that are happening. Now, to answer the last part of your question regarding the new players, obviously, as we are moving towards 6G, AI native network can become a major driver of new players, right? So the network will actually run AI models inside the RAN for network optimizations, which brings in AI compute companies like NVIDIA, not as a standard builder, but maybe because their massive edge AI workloads set the KPIs 6G must meet. On the XR side, we are seeing Meta, Google doing exactly the same thing, right? These smart glasses are going to define ultra low latency, precision sensing, and bandwidth targets for 6G. So it's very important, again, to point out that all these new players, whether it's NTN that is bringing the satellite operators, new space launch, or integrated sensing that is going to bring automotive, robotics, and drone technology, all of them are there not to own IP or write the standards. They are mainly there to use the standards in their products. And by doing so, I think they're going to end up influencing the KPIs and performance targets that 6G is going to meet.
Now that is super
I hope
exciting.
I answered your question. Yeah.
No, very, very well. I expected no less. That was great. And I remember 10 years ago where the V2X group was founded and Volkswagen, Daimler, together with Qualcomm, was meeting in that group to kind of define what V2X should look like. And I understand as a user of that technology, you want to have a seat at the table. So that makes perfect sense. So very exciting. And Gene, also very timely, a question on that question for our audience. And that's the last for today, I promise. You want to read that, Gene?
Sure. We have, as we move towards 6G, how do you expect the next generation of wireless technology to affect the landscape of patent owners? Significantly reshuffle some new entrants, or is it too early to predict? And again, gentlemen, there is one answer running away with it here. So if you had to guess, which one is going to run away with it?
I can tell you my personal opinion. I don't expect meaningful changes in who owns and controls 6G patents compared to 5G, just based on the observation I described earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It would be the second option.
Okay, Lew?
Well, I mean, historically, we've seen that as new players enter the field, they experiment, they get better and better, and they might eventually make some leap. And you could just think about the trajectory of Huawei, right? They were absent, they made a concerted effort, they improved, and now they're a major monetizer. So you sort of wonder whether people like Xiaomi, Vivo, Oppo, or whoever you may come up with in the last generation that was new will improve and do better this time, better in quantity, quality, both, influence on the standard. I don't know. But, this is what we've seen in the past. People can get better over time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe not shockingly, Shahrokh, you were right, at least insofar as our audience is concerned. I mean, it's nice to think that there's going to be a whole new landscape and new players coming in, and maybe over time we will see some new entrants. And NVIDIA, that's one that, I know that they're doing something different now, but like you could see a company so large, so many resources, so exciting. If they wanted to, maybe they could pivot and get more in this, but it seems like there's so much money to be made, and everybody stay in their lane and do what they do really well, and then collaborate and cooperate. Maybe that's the future, and that I think some new entrants makes probably a lot more sense, I suppose, than a reordering of the system. Tim, is that what you would have expected?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the question, the first one was like a significant change, right? And
Right.
that it makes sense, right? Why would the players that have so much experience, and I think we need those Qualcomms of the world because otherwise, that years of experience that come from something. But I agree. I think there's always a chance with the new technology that we see maybe some players that, if you think of rankings that are now maybe, more in the
Mhm.
top 20 than the top 10, but suddenly they come up to be in the top 10 and they pick up their game and they, bring in something new. And of course, we will see a lot of companies that will be rather observing or having a smaller influence on the patent owning front, but more about interface designs because they want to be using the technology for
Mhm.
their new devices, and who will be the first to take also a license because they have to integrate that technology. And I think that will be increasing and more diverse, right? We heard at the beginning, major licensing happens still in handsets. Automotive came in, and there's a little bit of IoT now. But what if other smart gadgets are becoming the main interface of how we interact, right? Smart glasses may be the next thing. We don't need smartphones anymore. We prefer glasses, right? So I think
Right.
that can shift. And with that shift, also licensing will shift. So I would predict, at least not maybe a change of, is Qualcomm going to be a major player of SEP holder? I would say yes. But maybe is the whole dynamic going to be shifting? Likely it could, right? So I think that's something interesting ahead.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, excellent. So we're just over time, but if you all would like to share your final takeaway message, your thoughts, what you think matters, that you want the audience to really keep in mind as they walk out the webinar room door here today, what do you hope that they got out of it today? Lew, we could start with you. Shahrokh and Tim, I'll give you the last word. Lew.
Yeah, sure. So I guess what's on my mind is that people should be improving their budgeting and understanding their IP bill of materials in light of this sort of golden age, and thinking about whether they've got the right amounts budgeted or in their evaluation for new products and product economics. So that's one takeaway for me.
Great, excellent. Thanks, Shahrokh.
A couple of takeaways, or maybe three. So first of all, the 5G SIP landscape is pretty stable. It's well functioning, and Hansen, of course, remains the core of the licensing market, and negotiations there follow a mature, predictive process. The second takeaway is that these SIP data and rankings may surface during negotiations, but they don't determine licensing terms. And what actually matters in is the technical evaluation, exchanging claim charts, assessing the essentiality, validity, coverage, relevance, real-world deployments, whether the patent involved truly foundational technologies, among many other factors. And now looking ahead to 6G, we are talking about a major leap in performance and efficiency, and much more than just a faster radio. So 6G is going to be really about creating a smart, adaptive fabric that is going to connect people, devices, and environments, enabling intelligent computing everywhere. And with AI and integrated sensing built directly into the system, 6G will power agentic AI across everything from phones to wearables to AR glasses, and it's going to unlock entirely new real-time experiences and use cases. And as these capabilities take shape, these set strategies and portfolios need to evolve now to stay aligned with where the technology is headed. And importantly, 6G is not a reset. It's just a continuation, an evolution
Mhm.
building on 5G's foundation. The technologies are going to carry forward and scale. And it's really exciting time for both innovation and licensing. And the work that we can do today is going to lay the foundation for the next decade of connected intelligence.
Excellent. Great. Thanks a lot, Shahrokh. And Tim, the final word goes to you today.
Yes, I of course want to mainly comment on data and how that helps. I think one thing that is often misunderstood is that we are in a world of SEPs and licensing there that is not perfect in terms of information, right? Even though we have all these claim charts, I think we will never come to a place where we can count by one patent or one patent family who owns how many essential patents. And even if we do, as Shahrokh said, we have different ways of implementing them. And an essential patent may not be used because you're implementing the standard for a very particular use case. And even if I would argue some of the patents are much more valuable than others, right? Both essential, but have different values. One is core, one is marginal. So we have to kind of accept that we live in an imperfect world of imperfect information. And I think that is also how you should approach data, right? We look at data in terms of understanding patterns, like patterns of portfolio size, value, and how we can slice and dice portfolios into different buckets, technology focus, focus on core technology compared to marginal technologies. We can look at all this, not perfect, but we can see patterns. And I think that's how data has to be approached. And even though a litigation or licensing often is important to have, you make the case with these claim charts because you're infringing. But the discussion that we support is more about how can we use data to find correlations and more, I would say, patterns that tell us a little bit about the portfolio value and how important and how core it is. And that's not about whether or not something is infringing. It's more about we have these portfolio sizes and we need to make an understanding, right? And this includes looking at comparable licenses. This includes looking at some of the data. And I think if you approach data that way, it can be helpful. And one point and one piece of the puzzle of all the information that we have to gather to come to conclusions, to come to a deal and to close deals. And I think that should be the major goal always in licensing and SEPs. Is not that litigation and the conflict. It should be efficiency in closing deals. And I think that at least was always the mission of IPlytics and now is the mission of LexisNexis, that we want to support deal making, increase efficiency, and not contribute to any disputes or any, misunderstandings in the world. And I think that will be my take on how I see the world and how I see using data the right way.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Shrew. Thank you, Lew. And thank you to everyone in the audience. We appreciate you spending a portion of your day here today with us. That's all we have for today. We hope to see you soon. And but bye for now, everybody.
Thank you, Gene.
Bye. Thank you.